So in the last chapter on the kind of process of persuasion, we look at the audience. Are there some people who are more likely to be persuaded by certain types of message than others? So basically what we're asking here is, are different people more likely to use the central route or the peripheral route? And from the first chapter, we already know that one thing really matters. This is the beliefs people hold. So, for instance, here in my research on the confirmation bias, you can see that people, let me just activate the pan, that people who have one type of belief, that is, for instance, that agrees with the type of persuasive message, are using then, once my belief fits your belief, then I'm more likely to take the central route, I'm more likely to process your information carefully. Yet when my belief that I hold is disconfirmed, or you disagree with that, then I'm more likely to simply reject that information. So the beliefs people hold when they receive the information matter tremendously in determining whether we use or accept that information or whether we simply reject it. So the beliefs people have has a tremendous impact on persuasion, and you can easily see that, right, in the political realm and in other realms where it's like, if people don't go in as a blank slate, no, they go in and have certain assumptions already, and if you disagree with these assumptions, you might have a really hard time convincing anyone, even though you have the best evidence. Another point that I mentioned earlier in one of the chapters is that research previously found that, oh, look at that, women are more easy to persuade, more easy to influence than men. This was research by Shelley Chaikin that looked at your attractiveness, but many other early research found that. So there is like this idea that all women seem to be more influenced by peripheral cues, for instance, by the attractiveness of the messengers. But later on, what crystallized in this process is that the topics people used in early research were topics that men know a lot about, because more often than not, people did the research, that planned the research, planned it about their own interests, and these were men, and men planned the research in a way that was more fitted better the beliefs and the knowledge of men than women. So it seems like, and this is what subsequently research confirmed, is that the more influence effect of that women are more influenced than men were simply due to the fact that women knew less about the topics that they were trying to be persuaded about, right? So it's another factor that if you know about a topic a lot, then it's much harder for me to convince you of something new, to change your attitude. Whereas if you know nothing about the area or very little, it's easier for me to persuade you. So beliefs and pre-existing knowledge, which go kind of hand in hand, help us to understand why some people respond one way or the other to one way or to other to persuasive messages. If you remember, I think very early on in one of the episodes on social psychology, I said like one of the key things to understand is this idea that there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and people have to find ways to handle that, right? This is a key assumption of social psychology, and that resurfaces here again, okay? So we can't know perfectly well whether this attitude, like this persuasive message, is true or not, or we can't process all the information around it. So for instance, take climate change. Can you, when you get a persuasive message around climate change, can you check whether it's true? Can you see whether the science behind it is sound? Is there actually a way to know the truth about that? So there's uncertainty and information overload, and we have to kind of use some cues in order to navigate this. The idea here is that we introduced earlier is that there are some people who are kind of cognitive misers, right? They do not like to invest, or like people are kind of spoiled the bottom line here. Basically, it's like, oh, Susan Fiske and Shelley Taylor, they said like, okay, what's happening is that people are cognitive misers because there's so much information, they kind of avoid any effort. And there's Kahneman and Tversky, right? And they say, you know, people solve this problem by using heuristics, simple cues and biases to help them navigate that. And there are others in the research vision that I'm quite attached to, that say, well, we have this motivated cognition where we want to believe certain things, and that then guides our behavior and our information processing. So here there's 3 ways to handle information overload and uncertainty. And the research on audience effects basically suggests that there are some people who are more likely to be cognitive misers. There are some people who are more likely to use kind of simple heuristics to do that because they don't want to invest too much effort. And there are some people who are more prone to motivated cognition than others. So while we all have these tendencies might be somewhat more pronounced in one or the other. So here's kind of like a fun research on this topic that reveals a little bit the idea of that. You can read this statement here: hidden meaning transforms unparalleled abstract beauty. And then in this research I would give you a statement like that, and then I would ask you, is that something profound or is it not very profound? You can see here in the title of this research, on a reception detection of pseudo-profound bullshit, that probably this is not very profound. Yet what the research finds here is that people who are more likely to use intuitive heuristics and biases, who are less likely to exert mental effort when processing information, they also like such messages more. They feel they're more profound and that they have some kind of higher truth to them. So there seems to be a way of processing information that separates people. Some people are more prone to kind of exert effort while others are not. I think one really interesting question here is what happens if beliefs and these kind of tendencies hit together. So let's say, and this is one of my favorite researchers in this area, let's say I measure your numeracy. This is how well you're equipped in figuring out statistical information. Okay, so this is here, you can see this is the participants. They were either liberals or conservatives, and first Kahan and colleagues, what he did is like he measured the numeracy, how well they are educated in figuring out scientific data. Okay, and then they presented them 2 skin treatments. One skin treatment was ineffective and the other one was effective. And here you can see the higher you're here, the higher your numeracy, the more a scientist you are. And the higher you're here, then the more likely are you to figure out the correct information. And what you can see here basically in the data is that everyone with the higher the numeracy, the better they were to figure out the correct information. It didn't depend on whether the rush was increasing or the rush was decreasing. So the outcome of the skin treatment that they needed to judge, it didn't matter. People with high numeracy, independent of whether they were Democrats or conservatives, this is an American study, whether they were Democrats or conservatives, they could figure out whether the treatment was successful or not. But what happens if we give them something where they have pre-existing beliefs? So what then Kahan did is he gave them versions of gun control treatment. So they said, for instance, in one, here's a gun control, there's a new law that increases the gun control. And now what happens is that either crime increases or crime decreases. Okay, and now they had to figure out whether or not this gun control law is effective or not. Okay, so again, you have the numeracy, and you have the correct interpretation of the data. So what you can see, let me walk you carefully through this. Okay, remember the blue ones are the Democrats. So the Democrats would like to believe that if you have tougher gun controls, then the crime decreases. And if this actually was the correct solution, then you can see they were really good at figuring it out. And if the correct solution was that crime increases with tougher gun laws, then Republicans were really good in figuring it out, because both the decrease and the increase fitted very nicely their ideology and worldview. But what happened if their worldview crashed with the scientific data. So here, crime increases, something Democrats don't want. They want gun control to work. So now, and crime decreases. So what you can see here is that people who were extremely numerate, who were almost as good a scientists as I am, just joking, who are probably better even, they were as good as people who had no scientific knowledge, who could not figure out any numbers in the tests. So the moment the worldview crashed with the scientific evidence, what won was the worldview and not so much the numeracy. So often people say like, oh my God, if we want to have people who, conservatives and Democrats, if we want to have a left and right on a political spectrum interact better and kind of use information, they all have to become more scientists. But it seems like that if you use your numeracy depends on the beliefs you held before, and simply increasing numeracy or scientific training does not make you a better interpreter of the world when the world crashes with your views.